Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorn, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. Now, this podcast, believe it or not, has been going for 4 years. I like to say we're on season 4. And it's fair to say, even though I believe the quality has been good, the quality of hosts and guests has gone downhill. Because when we started this with the OG listeners, we had an actual fighter pilot giving his expertise, a man called Boucousis. We loved him. He was very cool. He would do the podcast in the studio. He would dial in the middle of COVID. And then one day, like that, he was gone. And we were all very sad and we were very hurt. And then I was told today by Phil Tarrant, another OG host, that he was back. He was back like he'd been bored of his new lover and he's going back to that warm bosom he knows. And I'm delighted to say Boucousis is back on the show. Christian, how are you?
Hello, mates. I'm good. Yeah, you pretty much summed up your typical fighter pilot ADHD mentality to just disappear, drop things, go somewhere else, come back. So, yeah, I mean, it's been amazing, the show. The great thing about the world today, I mean, when Australian Aviation started, you had to get it in the mail, right? You had to subscribe. Yep. You ripped out your piece of the magazine and your address and you put in a check, probably still have some of those. And, you know, I'm living in America now. You would just have to wait till it came on a ship and keep up with the information. But now on Facebook, on the website,
all
the
channels.
podcast is great. Yeah,
multimedia,
yeah.
We do awards, we've got a summit planned, we've got the website, we've got social media. This is now a video. We're on YouTube now.
And it's, and it never ends. There's always news. There's always something happening.
That's the thing, because I assumed that COVID was this exciting period and when it ended, it would be boring.
Remember, we were wondering whether aviation would ever bounce back.
It somehow did.
How many airlines are going to bankrupt? It was like only one or two airlines.
Well, yeah, it did all right. Like in the end, we lost Tiger and everything else sort of came back, and we're kind of, in terms of services and stuff, we're actually better than we were before.
Services. As for service.
Yeah, that's poor.
Yeah,
that's poor.
And the quality of the upholstery and the interior and the exterior, I think there's we've left a little bit behind pre-COVID.
Now, let's put that aviation stuff to one side for a minute. How have you been? Where have you been? We've not had you on this show for 2.5 years. They want to know. You've broken their hearts. They want to know what you've been up to.
Hardly. Gosh, well, obviously sold the business and into the custodianship of Momentum Media. It's been going great. And then I just went back to flying, obviously doing the leisure stuff, and then all of a sudden ended up living in the US. So I bought a company called Afterburner. Afterburner is the global brand of fighter pilots. I was doing that here in Australia. The founder of it, a guy called Jim Murphy, got a little bit tired. And next thing we know, I've got the family on an airplane. We're living in Miami and traveling all over the world in the US, sharing fighter pilot mindset and the ways of working, which in today's world have actually become more relevant given the amount of information we're trying to consume. The world's moving along at speed. It's exactly what it's like being a fighter pilot. You have to solve those two problems. From the minute the landing gear goes in to the minute it comes down again, you are just constantly trying to stay ahead of the airplane. So lucky me, I get to do for my entire life now and to the end to go and share with people this fighter pilot mindset to help them apply it in life. And in business.
Outside of this show, I have seen, Christian, I think about a year ago, you very cannily got involved in the extraordinary success of a second Top Gun movie, which I don't think anyone thought this movie would be bigger than the first one.
No.
But you got right involved with us. Talk me a little bit about this, because it got a whole generation of young people interested in fighter jets again. Yeah,
and that's an interesting conversation because at the moment we're seeing huge challenges in recruitment. But I was just only speaking yesterday to a recruiter for the Australian Air Force, and he mentioned that the recruitment pipeline has never been stronger than it is today. And I think what happened when Top Gun 2 came out, there was a bit of the world. Everyone gets the cycle of movies and news and everything so quick, right? So it came out, everyone was excited, and there was this perception that it was over. But interestingly, with Afterburner, we obviously use Top Gun as part of our storytelling. Doing the research into the movie, it was Paramount's biggest movie in 20 years. but it was the broadest appeal across all demographics of any movie in the history of movies. It had an equal amount of male and female viewers, race, religions, colours, across every metric. It had the broadest appeal across all of them. And I thought that's kind of cool, that genre. And it was, it wasn't fully into the whole wokeism of the world, was it? I mean, it's a fairly kind of bland, traditional type of movie. To have that sort of appeal, I thought was pretty cool.
Well, it saved cinema. This is the story, that it saved cinema. You had COVID and everyone was like, no one's going to go to the cinema anymore. What do we need to save it? Tom Cruise. He can sort any problem.
It was probably more, it was a little bit of fighter pilot and a lot of Tom Cruise.
Yes.
I think. Yeah, no, for sure.
Okay, welcome back. So one of the kind of underlying stories in the time you've been away is this idea of skill shortages, talent crisis. Particularly, we've seen this across the ADF. Now, I've heard whispers that the RAF is kind of struggling to recruit fighter pilots, but you're saying to me, you said before, they've got a strong pipeline. What are you hearing? Because at the moment it feels like, is it a problem that we haven't got enough people or not enough interest, or has that changed recently? What are you hearing about this?
Well, it's interesting, and being the CEO of Afterburner means that I get to work with a lot of fighter pilots from a lot of different services, even from Poland, the Royal Air Force. So you have this huge network, and now I'm in the US. I mostly have US fighter pilots working in the business, and it's a manpower issue. Now, it's not a recruitment issue, because recruitment's looking pretty healthy. It's a retention issue. And the challenge we have is that there is a significant rollout of the top of experience. So most fighter pilots have a 10-year commitment. The UK, US are a little bit different. They try and, I'd say the word incentivize, but probably the opposite, try and keep their pilots in for 20 years before they get a pension. In Australia, you can leave after your obligation, which is around 12 years, including training, with a healthy pension. But what's happening here is a lot of pilots, more than ever now, are leaving at that 12-year point. And where I live in Miami is a big cargo hub. So like Atlas Air has a huge operation there. In fact, it's most of their operations out of Florida. And there are an inordinate number of fighter pilots that are going straight over 80 to 100K sign-on bonus and captaincy within a few years, and they're kind of working 6 months of the year versus staying in the military, or they're going into the Middle East, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi, and in pilot training there. The workload is half. The challenge is the more senior you become as a fighter pilot, or any pilot in any squadron, not even fighter pilot, but in the military, you get more and more management roles. You still got to be competent at flying an airplane. In the average airline, all you do is fly an airplane. Or if you're in a management role, you do a lot of management and a little bit of flying an airplane. But pilots, whether you're a Herc pilot, C-27, P-8, as you get promoted, you have to be as proficient as you are with your management. So, Blind Freddy will tell you eventually you burn out. I'd throw on top of that, and particularly in the US, the operational demand. You're seeing pilots away 6 to 8 months of the year, and then again, and then again, and then the tinderbox fires up in the Middle East, and you've got F-35s and F-20. Again, the pilots are deploying, and these people need to sustain a family. And what's more expected now is the way that society has gone, particularly post-COVID, where everyone's used to people being around, that you're home, that you're spending time with your family. So there's a lot of stress being introduced into relationships because, whether it's the husband or the wife that's at home and the fighter pilot who's away, that stress is just not worth it. When I can be an airline pilot, I've got control over my schedule. I'm away 3 days, maybe 4 of the week, or if I'm international, I'm away for a week and then back again. That's the driver. And until the military, until the air forces can figure out how to solve that problem, to give people the stability and location, to allow them to be a specialist, whether it's a specialist manager or a specialist pilot, you are going to lose people. If you had the same practices in the civilian world, you would have no staff. Like you just wouldn't. In the post-COVID, hey, I'm going to work from home now, or I'm going to get another job. That's what's happening in the military. It's just the new job is the airline. Now, I've also worked very closely with a couple of airlines consulting, again, just, with the aviation background and being in business now for 20 years. Sometimes I get called across into airlines to work with pilots to help explain the business demand and what that means to them as pilots. And even in the airlines, there's a lot of stress because the airline pilot and their family at school and what the mums and the dads are talking about at school and how often they're home. And it's, a domestic pilot in Australia, a domestic pilot in the US, that's a busy job. And you have to show up. You can't just get on a Zoom at 9 or a Zoom at 12, and you have to switch on. And there is a passivity that is kind of encroaching in business now, where we're kind of used to machines doing more and more, and we're becoming a little bit more reactive. Yeah, I can't do that in aviation. It's still a pretty hands-on kind of hard job. Like it's kind of hard work. So you're starting to see this two-speed world where you've got the work from home, work life, home life integration, and aviation where work and life is still very much segregated. So I think this is a very long answer to a short question, right? I think that is the biggest challenge, not just for the Air Force, but it's becoming an issue for the airlines. The airlines are solving it by just throwing more and more money at it.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we actually ran a feature, I believe, in the last print issue of Australian Aviation. So I'll do the plug, go on our website, subscribe, find all the details there. And basically, the gist of the feature was that in the US, as I'm sure you're aware, there have been a few kind of breakthrough deals between the pilots' unions and the airlines, which has basically given them a lot better money and a lot better perks. And they've done this because they feel they had no option. There's so much of a fight for talent. So they're on a lot better conditions than they have previously. We haven't necessarily seen that situation here. So I'll give you an example. We had a girl called Hannah Doherty, who was a co-host of this show at one point after you left us, and still writes for us freelance. Her partner, who was a trainee pilot in Australia at the Qantas Academy, he's left to go to the US. He's like, that's where the opportunities are. And you know what? It's better than it is in Australia. So how does Australia, a smaller country with a smaller industry, compete with the US? Because a lot of people are having this thought.
Well, it's Australia. So that's the trump card.
Yeah.
It's
paradise.
It's amazing living here, right? Like there is I've traveled the world since the age of 19. I've lived in Europe. I've lived in the US, and I don't know, maybe I'm getting older, so I just like to sit around more. It's amazing here to live the day to day, the quality of the coffee, the food, the fact that every time you're making a transaction here, no one's trying to get a little bit more out of it or hide a bill or whatever. It's like we've got a pretty cruisy, cool culture here. It's a great place to live, right? As you would know, now living here and having moved from the UK. But when people are young and it's an adventure, that's what you're going to go and do. Now the problem with that in Australia is, based on the seniority model that our airlines run, you go and get a fast track to a captaincy in a regional airline in the US, and before you know it, you're a United captain at the age of 32. If you ever want to move back here again, you're back in as a second officer at Qantas, or you're going in as in the right hand seat, a Virgin or Bonza, and you're not going to see a captaincy for 15 years. At Qantas, probably 25 years. So that's the risk you run. And there are a lot of my friends that went and did the fast money in China, and it's a bitter pill to swallow, because you've gone from earning 250 or 300K as a captain, even domestic in the US at the moment, and then you're back here on 150, 160, maybe even 120, depending on what airline you're at an entry-level job, which is entry-level for an inordinately long period of time. So I think that when you say, it's, if you want to be a captain in an airline in Australia, you start early and you stay. If you want adventure and you don't want to be a captain in Australia, then go overseas. That's pretty much the end of that story. And I think why I don't think it's a purely an Air Force fighter pilot issue. I mean, the Navy is struggling to hold on to officers as well. To be at sea for 6 months of the year. Even those deployments have got smaller and smaller for lifestyle reasons and family reasons. So I think this is where what can we do about it? I don't think we're going to have a problem retaining pilots here as long as the remuneration is enough to pay the mortgage, have a Subaru, get your kids into a decent school. I think most people are happy with that. If you want the BMW and the lifestyle options, go fly for Qatar, go to Emirates, don't pay your tax, but you're not going to come back and get that's such an Australian thing to do, isn't it? Do your time, get in early. You've done your 30 years. Here's your capo. Enjoy the last 10 years. Yeah, that's how our society works here.
So the next thing I was going to talk about is you've moved to Miami, and so you now have a little bit of a different perspective, seeing the aviation industry in the US kind of firsthand. Now, one of the interesting things is while you've been away, the industry went to hell in a handcart. It all fell apart. And when we were doing this show, we had this idea that you'd have COVID, we'd have all these lockdowns, it would end, and then hopefully we'd all go back to normal. And what we saw, particularly in 2022 was chaos. We had delays, we had cancellations, and then that was due to talent shortage. That was due to a lack of spare parts. I mean, the aircraft were on the ground. One of the interesting things is that here in Australia, or the way it was reported in the media was that this is very much an Australia problem, but of course it wasn't. And we saw these things happen all around the world. What did you see in the US? Were they having similar problems of a scale that we saw here?
It's of a scale that's markedly more severe. I mean, it's still a challenge. I mean, I live in an amazing apartment in Miami. It's a nice apartment, but more importantly, it's right on the center line for the main runway into Miami International Airport. So we get to see all the traffic flying over the apartment, which is great. A little 2-year-old son absolutely loves it. But I fly out of Miami a lot. It's a big hub for American. It's a nice airport. It's there's like 52 gates just for American there, and it's just chaos. It's like putting too many sardines into the tin. Is what it's like. Like everything is hectic there. Security is hectic. It takes forever to get through the security lines. There's a lot of gate hopping. Very rarely are aircraft on time. The levels of service. I mean, you can't even use the word service to explain how it runs. It's just people show up wearing a uniform for the airline, and I mean the aircraft are very nice. It's quite funny actually. I fly American just because it's the hub, so there's a lot more flights out of Miami. But every now and again there's no American flights. So the other day I flew Delta, and I got to the gate and I looked out and I'm like, oh, it's a 757. I'm like, wow, I've never even flown on a 757 before. I'm like, this is pretty cool. So being a bit of a spotter, I looked at the tail number, and anyway, the tail number was, and the plane I was on was the world's oldest 757 still flying. So here you are with Delta, and Delta has some nice new, they've got A350s and some nice stuff as well. Here you are on the one hand flying the world's oldest still serviceable 757 in an airline, and then you're on American, and you're on the A320LRs, the 737 MAX, brand spanking new airplanes. So it's a real mixed bag. But I flew, just the other week I had to fly from Miami to Austin, Texas, and the aircraft couldn't land at Austin, Texas because of the crosswind. There was a huge cold front flying through America. So we diverted, ended up in San Antonio, sat on the plane for 3 hours. We were deplaned 6 people at a time because that's all they could fit in the van. That like this. So when things break there, it kind of breaks. Then we finally got to the gate, hired a car. So the short story is 3 days in a row, I did not get into a hotel before 3 a.m. due to disruptions to the flight schedule. And that was American, that was Spirit, that was Delta, and it was JetBlue by the time I organised all the different flights. So, but to me, the surprise packet over there is JetBlue. It is a really cool airline, super modern. It's that whole 1, 2, 3. You walk into the terminal, has big number 1. You check your bag. Get your boarding pass. Number 2, come over here, drop your bag. Number 3, go to the gate. So, you think about it, and because they're a challenger airline, what you realise is they're coming at it from the layperson who hasn't flown that often. For people like me that fly their whole life, have done for years and years and years, you just you get your bag. And I think that simplicity means that they're getting the gravitation of the of the community, and they're kind of the thriving airlines. They're new, so they're always at a new terminal. They're always negotiating a new deal. And then the big old legacy carriers that do the government work and are just not keeping up. So it's going to be interesting, I think, over there.
That is,
you could fly an airline without any cabin crew and put like literally wooden seats, and you're going to fill it at the moment over there. It's that buoyant. What's going to be really interesting is if the economy retraces a little bit and there's a bit more competition. It'll be interesting to see who the last man and woman standing is when that happens.
Well, you talked there about kind of a challenger airline and the legacy airlines and who's keeping well or not. This is a good segue to talk about something else that's kind of happened since you've been away, which is Bonza. Now, for those of you that are kind of unaware, Bonza launched with what they would call a point-to-point model. And what that essentially means is you fly from a holiday destination to another holiday destination and skip out the obvious layover. And this is something that almost everybody in the industry said would never work. They said Australia simply not big enough a country to pull this off. Bonza have launched almost a year ago, pretty much exactly, and they've made a good go of it. Some of their routes they've dropped and they've added new ones, but we interviewed the CEO last week. He says that they're on the brink of breaking even, which when they've only got sort of 6 aircraft now and they've only really been in full operation for 6 months is really, really, really good. A lot of good experiences people have had, and a lot of people from those smaller places that they service are saying this is a game changer for us. Are you surprised by their success? Because point to point is very usual in America.
Yeah, no, and not really, because I lived in the UK when the Jet 2s and the Ryanairs, it was sort of a new concept, right, where you'd fly to a smaller airfield. And I think where it's disruptive, I mean, the US is still very hub and spoke. It's still kind of hard. Again, I live in a hub, so it's easy for me. But I guess if you were to charge, a $600 return airfare Sydney-Melbourne and you were going point to point, wouldn't work. And that's the point, right? Like it's when you're challenging a bus fare, it's a completely different model. So I think and given the metrics of the Neos and the Max and just how much more efficient they are, it's clever. I mean, if you live in Albury, why do you want to go through Melbourne? Why do you want to go through Sydney if you can get straight to the Sunshine Coast? And you had to have a holiday. Of course you're going to go and do that, aren't you?
It is extraordinary. This is something we touched on earlier, that when we were doing this podcast originally, there was a point we wondered if there'd be an aviation industry left, that's how crazy it was. And it's easy now with the benefit to hindsight to go, oh yeah, it was always going to be all right. But there was a point we really didn't know when it felt like it was the apocalypse, and everyone was going crazy.
And I still feel like it's not like it was. Like it's a bit Frankensteinish, I think, at the moment. I still think aviation is the fleets ended up getting very old. Like I remember, I flew Cathay Pacific from LA to Hong Kong last week, and last time I flew Cathay, it was nice. Yeah. This time it was old. Nice cabin crew and all the rest, but the airplane was tired. And I think that there's a lot of that. To me, it seems like all the new airplanes went to the US. I mean, the fleet age there must be a lot younger than it is now, and no doubt Boeing had to cut some pretty epic deals. But I've been talking to a few pilots of the Max as well, and there's some concern. I actually spoke to a pilot the other day that left the airline to stop flying the Max, purely based on he said to me, it's literally like even the switches and some of the buttons and the paint, he says, the difference between a previous generation 7, even though it's exactly the same, he says it's like it's made out of everything's made out of something cheaper, or it's not screwed in properly. I mean, he was just talking about the number of safety reports that this is an Australian airline had been, well, probably shouldn't have said that. And the guys that work for us in the US and the UK say a similar thing. Really nice airplane, a lot of power, very, very thrifty, but just the flight computers just cycle off. Or it carries an engineering fault that they're waiting 6 months for a part. Is it going to fall out of the sky? No. Well, I don't know, but I presume no. Now you would certainly hope not. But I think that there's a general consensus that just as it takes a long time for your culture to erode, and for these things to slip in, it's a long time for your culture to rebuild and get to the point where your quality management systems. Was I reading it? Was it an article that you wrote? I was talking about like 1,800 safety notes have been written up now by airlines and given to Boeing on the 737 MAX.
Yeah, this is the issue because, again, when we were doing the show previously, we were talking about all the problems with the MAX, and the FAA grounded it for, 18 months or so, over 2 crashes, I think, killed nearly 350 people, I think it was, altogether. And when the FAA kind of got to the end of their investigation, they fined them $2.5 billion, I think it was. And obviously there was an actual technical issue with the aircraft, but really it wasn't about that. It was about a cultural issue at Boeing. And essentially what the FAA said is that the Boeing employees kind of misled and deceived their safety inspectors. And effectively they were sort of aware that there was a problem, but they were sort of hushing it up. And that's what led to this extraordinary fine. Now, then what you had is Boeing desperately tried to rebuild their reputation and to rebuild confidence in the MAX, because this is a large part of their business model. This is one of the most flown aircraft in the world. A lot of airlines have got very, very, very big orders that Boeing cannot afford to lose. And the kind of narrative a couple of years ago was, well, this is now the safest aircraft in the world. It's been checked so often. We've put all this behind us. And to be fair, it did feel like things were sort of getting back to normal.
And then the doors fall off.
Then the door falls off. It's the most extraordinary story because literally the door or the door plug came off in midair. It's something. And once the investigation occurred, extraordinarily, it literally turned out that the bolts it wasn't screwed in correctly, effectively. Now, essentially, the FAA have launched a kind of a full investigation into this. They grounded it for about 3 weeks. They've subsequently allowed them to return to service, but only after each one has been checked a lot. Now, Boeing would tell you, and the airlines would tell you, that this is purely a problem with that particular variant of the MAX and that they are checking them all and that this thing will get sorted out. But yet again, if we're talking about bolts not being fixed on correctly, that suggests there's one hell of a poor culture that you're not even checking that when you're signing off the aircraft. And it does feel like, how on earth can something like this happen again to the same aircraft? You'd think everybody would be obsessed about it now.
Yeah, I mean, there's that famous saying that originated out of Southwest Airlines, which is, if there's oil stains on the seat of an airplane, what's to say is going on in the engines? So it's that whole smoke and fire thing, isn't it? Look, you don't want to unpick into the details. You don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of the airworthiness directives and all the rest of it. But there's enough. There are many conversations that are going around from the pilot community about just generally things being less Boeing than the NGs or the previous generation. How does that play out? Look, I don't know. Is it when the F-111 came out, when the Hornet came, everything when it was new always had a problem and it was a lemon. I mean, these are complex machines, and it's only after you have tens of thousands of cycles that all the little bugs on. I mean, if you play PlayStation, and the billions of dollars that goes into a game and it doesn't work, it breaks and there's bugs. So, and given the nature of the technology, so how much of it is the culture on the up? It must. I don't know. I don't work there. But it must be on the up. Is it there where it was previously when it was, if it ain't Boeing, I'm not going? Probably not. And there's still clearly, work to be done. No one wants to get on an airplane and have the door come off. I mean, that's kind of basic 101.
Again, one of the other kind of greater topics we talked to was the kind of rivalry between Boeing and Airbus and their relative success. Again, since you've been...
I think Airbus is laughing. I mean,
yeah, of course they are.
You look at, I think Qantas is going to be an all Airbus fleet, for example, right?
Yeah.
In the near future. And you look at the orders, out of Paris, and I think you wonder whether people are only buying a MAX because they're getting a good deal. And I know that, I was talking to somebody a little while ago that it's actually in fleet, they buy the airplanes, right? And they're saying every airplane at the moment is about 30% over what it was, including the MAX. But, you wonder whether Michael O'Leary, the big fleet guys that are just sitting there and getting some hush money paid or something to keep flying these things. I don't know.
This is a very sort of famous story. It was within, I think, a week after the FAA had cleared the MAX and had done its fine. Within a week, you had Ryanair confirm this gigantic order. And I don't think they went into financials, but the very obvious undertone was, we got one hell of a deal.
Yeah.
And if there's one airline that's going to get you a deal, it's that one.
No, absolutely right. And that, I guess, is the upside of being an all 737 fleet. I know Virgin would probably like to get their hands on some of those as well, because it is economically, it's a great airplane. I mean, it really does unlock a lot of commercial upside, and Bonza is leaning into that. I mean, fundamentally, if the airplane gets from A to B more cheaply, it gets passed on. And it gets passed on means there's more customers, more flights, and these point-to-point routes start to stack up a little bit more. So, look, it's clearly, if this were the Lord of the Rings, we've only just found Gollum in the ring. There's plenty more left, plenty more chapters left in the 737 MAX book, I think.
Yeah, but it feels at the moment that Boeing, everything kind of that can go wrong for them does go wrong for them. But with Airbus, it's the opposite. So another big story that we saw 4 weeks ago was this Japan Airlines incident involving the A350-900, I think. And it was the first major accident involving this aircraft. Now, 9 times out of 10, a major incident, this would be horrendously bad news for Airbus. But actually, all the publicity came out the other way, because every single person on that aircraft got off, which is obviously a tribute to the cabin crew and Japan Airlines as well. But certainly a lot of the talk was actually, it's because it was a new generation aircraft. It's because of how Airbus designed it that effectively the time for it being on fire to it completely sort of exploding was enough time for them to get off. And almost all the publicity was, isn't this an excellent aircraft? Which is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. And a bit like a Volvo, right? People buy a Volvo because, if you crash, you're going to get out alive. If you look at that, and I was talking to an A350 pilot about this last week, one of my team, and he was saying, first of all, it's one of the worst things to have happen in A350 is the nose wheel to not work effectively, but to lose your nose wheel or to impact the nose wheel. But equally, is it the use of composites? Does a composite not buckle and break and leak fuel? I mean, composites are a more robust structure generally. And if you look at that when it comes to cyclists and carbon fiber bikes, the strength compared to a metal bike. So I'm sure there's some truth to it, but I thought what was interesting there was the conversation around the firefighters and how the firefighters didn't respond. They watched it. And looking at that, I can't recall the other incident. There was another incident where all the passengers were off. The firefighters were putting out the fire, but because of the heat, one of the engines exploded and the firefighter was killed. And how in this particular incident that the A350 was pretty much left to burn. So most of the photos and media being media were the sensational look at it on fire images, but when the aircraft's being evacuated, apparently it wasn't too bad. So, I mean, there's no such thing as bad PR, I guess.
No, it's not. Right now, before we wrap up, before we say goodbye to you for another 3 years and dump us, what's next for you? They love the listeners love you. They've missed you. What's next for you?
Just slowly take on that American accent, I guess. I mean,
don't do that. Be anything worse than your Australian accent, which I'm probably starting to get a little bit, sadly.
Look, the thing about the US is, as a GA pilot as well, there's just a lot more opportunity, a lot more flying. For the next year, it's just getting my feet under the desk with Afterburner, consolidate the brand, get ourselves a little bit more prolific in what we do, and really start to fly. I mean, I just love flying in the US. I mean, I just from Jackson Hole to Raleigh, North Carolina to Nashville. It's a very unique experience. Landing in the snow, waiting for your aircraft to be de-iced. You hop in the airplane at Miami, it's 27 degrees. You get out in New York, it's minus 12, and you've only been flying for 2.5 hours. So it's and just flying up the East Coast and seeing all of the lights and And just the busyness of it all, I think. And like I said, I get to work with a lot of airline pilots that are former fighter pilots, and hearing their stories, and it's just it's just a lot more dynamic. You get on flight radar and have a look. You can't even see the map underneath all the airplanes flying. So it's kind of cool, and also it's just. There's a lot going on there, like from Red 6, the company that's redefining air combat training for fighter pilots, like the first legit augmented reality training platform for fighter pilots. Dan, I was in the squadron with when I was in the UK, and just seeing that new cutting edge technology, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's just wait and see what happens with this new 777X. What's the one with the folding wings, with the Hornet wings on? And I was in Seattle the other day, and just as you drive into Seattle and you see Boeing Field, it's like literally almost in the middle of town, and you think, that's like Boeing. That's B-17s took off from there, and it's kind of sad that they're going through all this stuff. And it's just everything is it's like the origins of everything. The US, the Wright brothers. I mean, when it comes to aviation, the US was and is really the seat of everything. I mean, we're maybe starting to see the shift now with Airbus, but yeah, and you're on the beach, and there's F-16s and there's F-15s and there's all sorts flying. So it's a pretty cool place to be if you're a bit of an aviation nerd. And so I plan to indulge that. My son sits on the balcony and watches the jets fly over. We go swimming in the pool, and you can tell the cargo pilots, because they're always off center line and they're diving to the ground. They're kind of visually flying it, and then all the airlines are like absolutely perfectly lined up, and you just see these random airplanes fly over. It's pretty cool. So yeah, just like all of us, I guess, just toil away. But when I toil away, it's hanging out with fighter pilots and flying airplanes. So it's not a terrible way to spend your life, I have to say.
Well, you are living the dream still. And if you're not watching on YouTube, the smile of the enthusiasm is second to none. Thank you so much for coming back. We loved having you.
Thanks, Adam. Pleasure, mate. What a fortuitous set of circumstances. I love a little bit of serendipity.
Well, on that note, we will have to wrap things up. But we will be back on this show the same time next week. But for now, from us, goodbye.
Awesome.